this next session is a precursor for this afternoon session on CPG, which is probably the biggest way in which all of you are looking at building alternative revenue sources that you're not yet doing. So what we'll do with this one is provide a quick overview of some other alternative revenue models, and I'll run you through a project we did with Deloitte in fall 2021 that resulted in business model innovations. Kate Fournier's husband was actually one of the people who participated in this project. And then I'll have a couple of questions for Stephanie, and really it will be for you all to also ask her your questions around the decisions you have to make from a financial perspective when looking at diversifying your revenue stream. So we did this project with Deloitte, looking at what were some of the business model innovation that came out of the pandemic, what allowed restaurants to survive, using focus groups, interviews, and about 70 plus hours of direct engagement with restaurateurs from all over the country. And so what this turned into is this 12 business models that were surfaced and scored. And I'll run you through the 7 that had the most margin. So one of the big things in this particular project was really, there's things like, takeout, we know we do that, or delivery, those kind of things. What does it mean in terms of numbers? What are some of the obstacles that you should be considering? Are there legislation that you need to be changing before you do certain things? So this is a summary, if you want, that is really meant as a one-sheeter for each of those. If you're thinking, all right, so I want to open a market, right, 20% margin, that's pretty good. It seems really worth it. There's a high economic score. I can pretty much scale it up, and it's also sustainable and equitable. Obviously, the ESG score, the environmental score, is not always great when it comes to delivery or takeout, for example. That's always a little bit tricky, especially with supply chain issues. But so the models that I will take you through start with contract meal. I have them in order of margin result for each one of those. So contract meals, are any of you doing contract meals? Yeah, 1 or 2. So contract meals is, for example, during the pandemic, World Central Kitchen or a lot of local charities were contracting restaurants to deliver food to hospitals, for example, or to schools, or take that over. So there's a lot of that with NGOs, but there's also a lot with institutional structures, like schools, like other local organizations. So that one has a decent net profit margin of 10%. What is really useful about it is that it can be extremely reliable. Once you lock in one of these contracts, it's a steady business. It fills you in your slower time. It means like if you're adding revenue, even though the margin is 10%, there's another that's 30%. It's not one of your biggest one, but it's one of your most reliable, and it uses some of your existing resources also. That might be one worth exploring. There are some chefs working with SNAP, for example, providers, Meal for the Elderly, those kind of organizations. So really digging into your local communities and see, is there a need? Is there a need that could be fulfilled better by you because you're providing healthier food, better food, food that can be done? I mean, those are not things that where you're charging $20 per person per meal, right? But you might be able, building into your existing menu and inventory, you might be able to do really good food at a lower cost. That makes it really advantageous for these organizations to work with you. Some of the roadblocks on that one are procuring packaging, like many of those. Coordinating shipping logistics can be really tricky. Ideally, you don't need to hire additional staff to do this. But in some cases, so it might also be that you can give additional hours, or you can think through your staff and your existing staff structure and see how that might work with doing contract meals. Stephanie, is there anything on contract meals you want to add?
No, I think you hit all points. I think it was, during the pandemic, I had a lot of clients that did that, and they did it for charitable reasons. They did it to maintain employees. Specifically, they're really good employees. And so it does give, specifically the back of the house, that they're not tipped. Well, not across the country, but in many geographic territories, they're not tipped. So it gives them additional hours in additional ways because you're always paying back of the house overtime anyway. So it does give them that availability to earn extra dollars and keep the right. Human capital is one of your biggest challenges. So to keep them, it's a great resource.
Great. You'll get the slides, obviously, and you'll have all of the details. You'll see at the bottom for each one of these are steps to launch also to really help you go through this. Family-style meals to go. So, a little bit different than just takeout. Doing something that is like a sheet pan of lasagna or these kind of larger scale that a family for 4 might want to buy, for example. Prepackaged food for more than one person that they can reheat. So you can have it as frozen, as fresh. One of the big roadblocks for that one, so 15%, that's a pretty decent margin, right, on something like this. One of the, especially as people are going out a little bit more, there's a lot more happening again. It's not something that you should do 7 days a week. It's something that you should do 1 or 2 days a week. Makes it special, right? Like maybe it's Friday night. It seems like Friday night is homemade pizza at home night, right? Is that something where your restaurant can be providing an additional meal for families on a weekend or on a Sunday night? Maybe it's on one of the nights that is a little bit slower for you. Depends on your market. It depends on your marketing plan around this. Obviously, it does require some marketing, whether it is sharing that with your existing customer base. If you don't have an existing customer base, it's a little bit more challenging to try it. But there are companies, Wonder is one, for example, they're in New Jersey. They've launched with a roster of celebrity chefs from all around the country doing restaurant caliber food out of a van that comes and parks in your driveway and serves you food that way. It's actually really good. It's a really challenging sustainable business model. They've been selling some of their fleet. One of the things that they've added a lot to is family style meals like that to go, because I think that's a lot easier to do. And if you cook, it's more economically sustainable to cook for 4 than to cook for 1 if you have something like this.
And if you have a strong catering program to begin with and you do catering right, this could be really accretive. And then also, if you have a commissary, I don't know if anybody here has a commissary, but the biggest challenge with the commissary is feeding it, right? Feeding the commissary to make it make sense. So this enables you to actually potentially do it even more than a 1 or 2 if you do have that set up.
Takeout, are all of you here doing takeout? Yeah. Okay. Anyone not doing takeout? All right. A few.
I would comment on takeout. To streamline the menu, right? That's not offer everything. Everything doesn't travel well, right? Especially in the more like high end or even casual, casual dining. So price accordingly, and I think streamlining the menu, not offering up everything is really important, and really truly analyzing your takeout or third-party delivery.
Those are exactly the key points that came out of this project. Exactly that. Really think about what you're offering for takeout. Food that travels well, that will arrive and represent you well when it arrives in your customers. At your customers' doors. Ideally, you'll translate your takeout customers at 20% margin into dine-in customers, also in repeat customers especially. So all of that is important.
And people will pay a premium, right? We don't want to leave our house. People will pay a premium.
Yeah. And they are saving on things like wine or tip and all those things. Staffing is another thing to really, that is a roadblock here, balancing your staffing needs around that. If you're doing takeout at a really peak time on a Saturday night, for example, when you're slammed and you're doing takeout, it's really, really tricky. Look at your numbers. Is it worthwhile to have an extra staff person just for takeout at your peak hours?
Yes. And I think it's really important to understand your sales mix, right? So how much takeout as compared to like in dining takeout, because that's going to determine how you're going to staff your front of the house, right? So people, your managers, a lot of time they do like copy paste on, or they just look at, they maybe look at covers or maybe look at sales. But again, if you have a bunch of takeout sales as the main part of your sales, if it's 65-35, like what do you need a whole bunch of servers there? So I think understanding, and that goes back to understanding the data, understanding your numbers.
market is 20%. The market is when you have, did any of you start doing this or already? Yeah. How is that working? Yeah, Kate, that was one of the, how is that working for you markets?
Our markets, the seasonality of where we live and the beholden nature to tourism is a little bit different. Like I don't live, my business is not in a population-rich environment all the time. It's either very sleepy or very busy. So we're still figuring it out.
Mm-hmm. That's a really important consideration. What works for you depending on where you are, right? And that will affect what you are stocking in your market. If you are in an area with tourists, it's great to have things that are shelf stable, that might be featuring your products, but also products from other artisans around you, right? So you can maintain a little bit of stock. You obviously don't want that to incur too much cost because you're buying too much product. But if you have things that are not perishable, that could even, I mean, I've bought knitted scarves at restaurants before because it told a great story and it was right there and I had a great experience at dinner. I'm like, let me continue that. T-shirts is another great example. It's things that restaurants did not do as much before the pandemic, it feels like. I mean, I remember 10 years ago or so, 15 years ago in New York, there was a wave of restaurants that had markets, and it didn't really work because it was confusing for the customer in a way that it doesn't feel like it's the case anymore. People are getting a little bit more used to going to a restaurant for multiple needs that are being served.
I think also in the markets, it's an opportunity to sometimes, you know, upsell, like depending upon what your concept is, and if you have an alcohol, you know, you're allowed to serve alcohol. I mean, people want convenience, right? So if they're going to the market and they're getting prepared meals, they're going to buy that bottle of wine, and it's going to probably be cheaper at the wine store or the liquor store, but they're going to buy it there because it's one less place they have to go. So it's a great opportunity to upsell some of those items, as well as, you know, like I know, I live on Hilton Head Island. It's Vacation Town, USA. So every place has a little, you know, little market and things. And you see from, if you're in a tourism area, you know, people buy that stuff because they like it, and you keep it local. I think that's really the key. Keep it local in the community.
And train your staff to sell your stories. You just made me think, there's this place I really love in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and there's a lot of really great local breweries, beers in New Jersey, right? Craft breweries. I've had it before at that restaurant that has a market in the back. Well, guess what? I might be drinking one beer at the restaurant, but I'm leaving with a 6-pack because I really enjoyed it, right? So that's immediate revenue built in because of that. Some of the roadblocks here are space, obviously, and then the inventory and stock out. So this is where you have to look carefully at the numbers so you don't end up where you actually, if you're buying a lot of inventory from other vendors, even locally, you know, is this something for all of you who've watched Schitt's Creek? You know, he buys things on consignment and features products that he rebrands. Is that a model that works for you?
Yeah, you just have to be careful also, like, you know, shelf life of what you're putting there, specifically prepared foods, and really understanding what you're selling, what's selling and what not selling as well.
One that implies a lot of legislation is cocktails to go. Are any of you doing cocktails to go? Okay, great. In New York, the legislation changed last year. This is one where I think there's been a lot of lobbying and activism during the pandemic because, as you can see, 30%. And the kind of cocktails that you batch are ones that don't necessarily require a lot of expensive ingredients, but you can sell that at $15, $18 because people will be happy to have something to drink with whatever they're buying from you.
Yeah, I mean, this was huge during the pandemic. People really packaged it and made it fun. And it was a really great way to connect with the customers as well because they weren't coming into the restaurant. And that was, you know, a big part of, you know, how do we stay connected with our customers? So I had a lot of clients do this. And again, they packaged, you know, it could be a Mexican concept, and they did a margarita, and then they said, oh, coming with chips and, you know, chips and guac, or what, you know, or a signature appetizer that then they might do that might translate well, you know, packaging and traveling. So again, it's you know, people, if they're able to still do it, they're still doing it because it's fun. It's fun for people.
And if it's not something that is feasible legally where you are now, work with other restaurateurs where you are and change the legislation. That is how all of these temporary legislations became permanent ones.
Yeah, the restaurant associations, just I know in the various states, you know, I deal with tons of them all over the country, and they're the ones that push the legislation, and they want to know what you guys want. So it's in their best interest to push it. So in a lot of states, it was really where it was going to go away. The restaurant associations were the one that really pushed the legislators.
The last one is pop-up restaurants. So this is a 30% profit margin. Obviously, this is the kind of business model that depends if you already have one or you have not. What I hear from a lot of chefs around the country is, so there are people who are doing pop-ups to launch a concept, right? You have nothing, you want to get your name out there. That's been quite proven as a successful model. And then there is also, you want to test something else. Like I've talked with chefs from Chicago who want to try something in LA, or chefs from Florida who want to try something in New York. A pop-up is a really great way to test a new market, a new concept, et cetera.
It's tremendous, and it's on the rise. We see it, and I'm a huge fan of this because it doesn't require a lot of CapEx to do it. And it's short. You're not in a long-term lease. It could be a 3 months. It could be a 6-month gig, with whomever. There's a ton of space available, and so people, so it's a great way to test your brand in another market to see if it resonates before you really make that brick and mortar investment.
And on the revenue piece, one thing that is great about pop-ups, especially now that diners in general are so much more used to it, pre-sell your tickets, right? Like whether you're using Talk or something else, pre-sell your meals. You have the cash in your pocket before the people don't show up, for example, right?
And if you already have brand recognition, it's like, oh wow, I only get this. You know how it is. It's only going to be here for 3 months. I got to get in. So, that's great as well.
So this is the last of these models here. Any questions for Stephanie that you want to ask her around this? If not, I have 2 quick ones before we break for lunch. All right, so I'll ask you, what is if I'm doing any of these alternative revenue sources, do I need to structure them as their own businesses as part of mine, or what is some of the?
Well, it's depending upon what you're doing. We'll talk later. The next session, Irene and Jen are going to talk about CPG, and that's 100% should be a separate company. For not only for legal reasons, liability reasons, as well as tax reasons. There's a lot of in CPG, there's a lot of tax incentives from an income tax and other incentives. To go and things of that nature. If potentially if you're doing like the meal kits and things like that, and you do have a commissary, you might want to do a separate entity, or at least a separate division, just to keep track of the economics. But it's really dependent upon what you're doing, what you're physically doing. A lot of times when these pop-ups, I have clients that create separate LLCs for them as well, and it's really from more of a legal perspective. Then you want to protect the assets of your other restaurants. And
then obviously during the pandemic, all of this happened by everyone trying everything all at once and seeing what stuck. That is not a really good long-term solution. What is the financial modeling that I need to do when I'm thinking about diversifying my revenue?
No different than getting into, opening up a new restaurant, right? You have to see if the economics make sense. So again, I think I mentioned yesterday, I had a client that they had 12 different revenue streams, and they were trying everything at once, and they really weren't concentrating on 1 or 2, and they wasted a lot of money doing so. So before you get into anything, there was a lot of rushing into these things because you wanted any revenue source, right? You wanted any revenue to come in, and some of it really worked out well, some of it didn't. I think you all became better operators because of, if I'm always glass half full, so I think, as operators, you just became better. Because there was less cash coming in. So I think with any of these, that you're going into, I think you model it out no different than you'd model any like a new restaurant or anything like that, and understand, again, data is power, information is power. So understand, how you could leverage off your existing restaurant, your existing base model, how you leverage off of that to enable you to add on these additional revenue sources in a profitable manner. At the end of the day, it would be great to do takeout. It would be great to be third-party delivery. It would be great to do a meal kit. But if it's not profitable, there's no point in you doing it. And you need to realize that early on, right? Obviously, a model is a model, right? It's a projection. We're just making up numbers here, right? We're basing them off historical data, of course, and our industry knowledge. But if something doesn't work, you have to be able to cut it off rather quickly, because it's going to drain what you're bringing, the rest of your business, right? And it's just not money. I'm talking about time and energy, right? And so if you start branching out too quickly and in too many different directions, your core business is going to suffer.
Very important reminder. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
You're welcome.